I apologize, we're very behind on this channel. It's primarily due to the fact that I've been dealing with some health issues of my own recently, and as a result, everything got pushed back. We weren't able to do a Game 2 analysis video, which we typically do. The timing of my Tyler Hero Katya Elise Henry video was poor, and this video is reaching you guys way later than I'd like it to. But nevertheless, we're here. So make sure you drop a like, subscribe, and turn on our notifications to help the channel grow. And now that we got all that out of the way, cue the intro. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? A few weeks ago, we made a video on the Utah Jazz's situation, and in that video, I told you that things could potentially get really ugly for the Utah Jazz, primarily because we already knew that Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell, for the most part, they weren't necessarily transparent about this, but they were fairly cryptic in regards to them not necessarily being the best of friends. And that initially was a huge cause for concern, because based off of the Utah Jazz building around Rudy Gobert and eventually combining Donovan Mitchell with Rudy Gobert alongside with some really remarkable role players such as Joe Ingles and Bogdanovich, and eventually trading for Mike Conley Jr., then you started seeing players like Royce O'Neal breaking out. Jordan Clarkson won 6th Man of the Year last year. At some point, the Utah Jazz were considered to be the #1 team in the Western Conference. Now, at the same time, I will go out and say that this team, as great as they were in the regular season, and I don't mean to insult them, but they struck me as a type of team that has tremendous success in the regular season, but when it comes time for playoff series, a part of me felt like they were going to get exposed, whether it was this past year or if it was the year prior when they were first place in the Western Conference. And I mean no disrespect by that. I've just seen many teams like this in the past. The 2014 to 2015 Atlanta Hawks are another team that comes to mind. It's nothing against them. It's just one of those teams that if you had to face them in a 7-game series and you took some time to pick apart their weaknesses, you would figure out a way that you could easily beat this team and move forward in any playoff round. And ultimately, it seems like this team has stagnated behind the dynamic duo of Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell. Now, the good news is the fact that they have a bona fide franchise cornerstone in Donovan Mitchell, and he is under contract until the 2026 NBA season. The hard part is, what do you do in order to get Donovan Mitchell a good enough team to carry you to the promised land? How do you get the Utah Jazz to be good enough so they could defeat the likes of the Golden State Warriors, or maybe the Los Angeles Lakers if they ever figure that out, or the Los Angeles Clippers once they're fully healthy, or the Phoenix Suns, assuming that they don't get significantly weaker from the fact that they are probably going to have to trade DeAndre Ayton this summer. And we're going to have to make a separate video on that because that in of itself is a whole can of worms. But the question remains, where do the Utah Jazz go from here? Because for the most part, in terms of roster construction, I think they did a remarkable job. I mean, Royce O'Neal was a gem to find. They made some very shrewd acquisitions of Hassan Whiteside and Rudy Gobert, who isn't the same player that he once was, but still, they went ahead and got Nikhil Alexander-Walker. They have Bojan Bogdanovich, Mike Conley. This team was constructed really intelligently. The question now is, where do they go from here? Well, the first step is clearly they're going to have to figure out what to do with Rudy Gobert. There's a rumor that he's going to get traded to the Dallas Mavericks. We're going to figure out more about that once the offseason officially begins. But one of the biggest pieces to the puzzle, Quinn Snyder, has officially stepped away. And that's where things get really volatile for the Utah Jazz. Because initially, this team was being built to fulfill Quinn Snyder's vision. You need to understand that as far as head coaches come, one of the most complicated head coaches to play for was Quinn Snyder. The Utah Jazz's offense was one of the most difficult offenses for any NBA player to pick up. It's not as simplistic as most other offenses are. Most NBA offenses, for the most part, run based upon the principle of 4 players out with 1 primary ball handler. And they'll throw in a couple of screens in order to mess up opposing defenses. This is an overly simplified version of what the modern NBA offense is, but since most most players in the NBA are above average shooters, your main goal is to now either try to create offense for one of those jump shooters or get defenses to commit so much so to those shooters that you can easily have your superstar in one-on-one ISO situations, which offense is favored in the NBA, which will result in that player having tremendous success. But Quinn Snyder's system was significantly different, and that's what made the Utah Jazz so unique. And that's because for the most part, he took Greg Popovich's motion offense and he created an iteration of his own motion offense once he got to Utah. But that's not the case anymore, because according to Adrian Wojnarowski, Quinn Snyder is planning to step down, sources tell ESPN. Now you might be wondering, why on earth would Quinn Snyder decide to step down? Well, according to Woj, after 8 seasons as coach, Snyder simply decided that it's time to step away. Conversations had been amicable with team, relationships still strong, but Snyder has decided to leave after building the Jazz into a perennial playoff contender. And this is where things get a little bit more obvious. After losing Snyder, the second winningest coach in franchise history, the Jazz plan to commence on a coaching search immediately. So Shams Charania says that those coaching candidates are going to be Knicks assistant Johnny Bryant, Jazz assistant Alex Jensen, former Trailblazers coach Terry Stotts, Celtics assistant Will Hardy, and Raptors assistant Adrian Griffin. You might be wondering why on earth Quinn Snyder took this long to decide that he no longer wanted to coach the Utah Jazz, because if he made his decision soon enough, he could have taken the Los Angeles Lakers job. First things first, I'm going to say this over and over and over again, and this is nothing against Darvin Ham because I think he was a great hire, but most head coaches, especially accomplished head coaches, would not want anything to do with the Los Angeles Lakers coaching job. It's a coaching job that would be significantly more appealing to a younger head coach that's trying to make their career, not necessarily a more experienced head coach that wants to take on the very daunting task of coaching 3 superstars that, with respect to my favorite team, have pretty big egos. I also don't think Quinn Snyder would work with the Los Angeles Lakers. I don't think the Lakers are capable of running any type of motion offense. I can't see Russell Westbrook really fitting into an offense like that. I could see Anthony Davis fitting into an offense like that. Maybe LeBron James can fit into an offense like that, but that's besides the point. This video is about the Utah Jazz. Apparently, the reason why Quinn Snyder wanted to leave is because he felt like the Utah Jazz have plateaued and they need a brand new voice in order to reach that next level, which is very interesting to say because obviously Donovan Mitchell isn't really happy about this. This is Donovan Mitchell's only head coach during his time in the NBA, and apparently he is unsettled, unnerved, and wondering what it means for the franchise's future. That is by far the vaguest thing I've ever heard. Like, I am unsettled, I am unnerved, and I wonder what it means for our franchise's future. Obviously you wonder what it means for your franchise's future. Your head coach just stepped down. What if there were politics involved that resulted in Quinn Snyder stepping down? Apparently, according to this article, Donovan Mitchell considered Snyder a significant part of his reasoning for committing to a 5-year maximum contract extension in 2020, and Snyder's decision to step away on Sunday has left Mitchell surprised and disappointed. Now, I'm gonna be honest, it really wouldn't have mattered if Snyder was a huge factor to Donovan Mitchell deciding to stay, because the Utah Jazz would be able to match any contract that was given to Donovan Mitchell, so it wouldn't have mattered. No matter what, Donovan Mitchell was going to stay in Utah until the 2026 season. Now, it continues to say that Mitchell remains fond of Snyder and accepts his reasons for stepping down, but Mitchell is spending the immediate aftermath of Snyder's decision trying to process what the coach's loss means in the larger scope for the organization and himself. Now, I could understand this. I mean, after all, Donovan Mitchell, with respect to Donovan Mitchell, wasn't expected to be this good of a player when he was drafted in the 2017 NBA draft. And the fact that he became this type of player is pretty freaking awesome. A part of you has to wonder, did he become this type of player because of the type of offense that Quinn Snyder ran? There's not many NBA teams that run that motion style of offense that Quinn Snyder did. The last team that even came close to doing it, aside from the San Antonio Spurs, were the Mike Budenholzer Atlanta Hawks. And even that team, currently, Coach Bud doesn't run that type of offense with the Milwaukee Bucks. So I can understand his concern. There might be a part of Donovan Mitchell that's saying, what does this mean for me? Would he be running a more traditional offense moving forward? How is that going to work for Donovan Mitchell? At the end of the day, the Utah Jazz are in a very difficult situation in the sense that this is a team that finished first in offensive rating this year with 116.7, and they finished 9th in defensive rating. They had a plus 6.2 net rating this past season. This isn't something you want to hear if you're a Utah Jazz fan, because in order to get to that next step, I feel like there needed to be some incremental improvement, or at least some improvement on the front of playoff basketball. And I guess the fact that they didn't necessarily have an answer for any type of small ball lineup ended up being the Utah Jazz's demise. Regardless, it should be very interesting to see what's going to happen next, because this is just the very first domino to fall, and it's the very first legitimate domino to fall. Prior to this, we were just making speculative videos based off of what we've been hearing from the media. Echoes of Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert not getting along with one another. The fact that Rudy Gobert's contract is a bit of an albatross on the Utah Jazz's neck. And considering how he should be a few years away from no longer being the player that he once was, it's clearly in the Utah Jazz's best interest to move on from him. But now we have a scenario where, without a doubt, the glue of this team that held all the pieces together is now gone. Quinn Snyder constructed one of the best offenses in the entire NBA that put a bunch of players that you wouldn't expect to succeed in a situation where they're contending perennially. And this is going to be the biggest test of Donovan Mitchell's young career. Who are the Utah Jazz going to get next to coach them? Is it going to be an assistant coach that they're hiring from within? I would say that's probably their best option at this point. But let me know in the comment section down below what you guys think about all this, man. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.